Imagine a heavy wooden wheel, 45 feet tall, grinding down a dirt road. Now imagine throwing yourself directly into its path. This happened routinely at the Puri Jagannath temple. Devotees would rush the moving structure, seeking salvation by allowing themselves to be crushed beneath it. Records from the era show this extreme physical offering took many forms. Devotees severed their own limbs, tongues, and even their heads as offerings to the deity Shiva. In the central and eastern regions, communities like the Gond and Santhal tribes practiced human sacrifice. They believed offering a life to agricultural deities was the only way to ensure rain and a bountiful harvest. These acts appear monstrous today, but the people committing them were acting out of a profound, albeit misguided, sense of religious piety. Take the Maria sacrifice of the Gond tribes. The chosen victim was often purchased as an infant and raised with immense affection. The community protected the child from any pain or sorrow for years. When the time came, the village didn't mourn. They held a vibrant festival. Only after days of music and dancing was the sacrifice finally carried out. This willingness to trade life for spiritual merit was ubiquitous. At sacred sites like the River Ganges, up to 50,000 people a year would willingly wade into the currents and drown themselves. None of this was a secret. Observers noted that mangled bodies lay in the streets, scavenged by animals, while local populations walked past with complete indifference. This leaves us with a glaring historical question. A massive, highly sophisticated civilization lived right next door to these communities. Why was a continuous humanitarian crisis completely ignored by the people closest to it? The push to end these rituals eventually came from outside the region through Christian missionaries. Previous conquerors relied on weapons to impose order. The missionaries brought no swords, no guns, and no military backing to halt the violence. Instead, they left their native countries, crossed oceans, and walked directly into isolated tribal territories. They embedded themselves among communities known to routinely sacrifice outsiders. Their primary tactic was linguistic. Rather than shouting condemnations, they spent years listening. They learned obscure, unwritten dialects and authored the very first formal grammars and primers for these languages. They understood that you cannot force a society to abandon deeply held beliefs from the outside. You have to build trust through cultural immersion. With that trust established, they built physical infrastructure. They set up hospitals providing free medical care, and they established permanent schools. For the first time, tribal youth were introduced to literacy. Access to modern education rapidly expanded their understanding of the wider world. Alongside reading and writing, the missionaries offered a new theological logic. They introduced the gospel, teaching that God had already provided the ultimate sacrifice in Jesus, negating any cosmic requirement for human blood. Equipped with literacy, a broader worldview, and an alternative religious framework, the tribal communities came to their own conclusions. They recognized the brutality of their rituals and voluntarily ended the sacrifices. Which brings us back to our unanswered question. Why did it require foreign travelers to accomplish what a dominant neighboring civilization could not? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of India's foremost social reformers, identified the exact sociological reason for this. Ambedkar argued that to civilize a marginalized group, you must live among them. You have to foster a deep sense of empathy and regard them as your own kin. The rigid Hindu caste system explicitly forbade this. Society was strictly stratified, making genuine integration impossible. Interacting with indigenous tribes meant associating with people deemed uncivilized. Doing so meant forfeiting their own caste superiority and ritual purity, a price they refused to pay. The missionaries succeeded precisely because their worldview operated outside the caste system. They viewed the marginalized as equals. True humanitarian intervention requires a social framework where one life is inherently worth exactly the same as another.